Okay, so hello again, everyone. In my brief time here, we're going to talk about co-planning and how it's the key to successful co-teaching. And so the goal is to share some resources with you. So before we had this session, we sent out a link to you all asking like, what questions did you need responses to about co-planning? So that's going to be the guiding force for this part of the presentation. So the first question is, what are the responsibilities of both the general education teacher and special education teacher in the co-planning process? The second question is, what are some methods that can be used to co-plan, especially in a virtual environment? And the third question, which I know we all are concerned about, is how can co-planning be done when teachers have different schedules? So as an icebreaker for this segment, we're going to do a Menti word cloud. So if you all have your cell phone near, if you could just go type on your cell phone, open up your browser and put in menti.com, and then I'm going to give you a code. And what I'd like you to do now, when you get to that website and I give you the code, is I want you just to type in up to 3 words that describe your current co-teaching process. So when you go to menti.com, it's going to ask you for a code. And then the code is 4966267. So it's going to say words to describe your current co-teaching process. So you can type up to 3 words. Oh, I'm glad to hear people having fun planning.
Non-existent.
Yeah, we hear that frequently. Okay, so we can see how everyone is feeling about co-planning. Hopefully when we get to the end, some of these words that have negative connotations to them, you'll feel more hopeful about the co-planning process by the end, because we're going to share some strategies with you for co-planning. So, like I said at the beginning, co-planning, there's no co-teaching without it, because without that time to share teacher expertise with each other, the class often goes the way it always has been taught, right? There's no value added to having a second person in the classroom. So because it kind of falls on whoever the general ed teacher is, that general ed teacher is making the plan. And then that becomes like a snowball effect of the general ed teacher possibly feeling, oh, I have all of the responsibility, even though the special educator might want it, or the other specialist might want to contribute. But if that time is not carved out, then it just becomes, I'm just gonna be a part of the classroom, almost like just a fly on the wall in the classroom. And that's how we often revert to that one teach, one assist co-teaching model, because one person becomes just assisting with the other person's plan. So what is the value added of 2 people if they don't have that time to plan and actually execute the lesson together? So Lisa Murawski, who's done a lot of writing on co-teaching, posed this question in one of her articles that I read. How are what we are doing together substantively better for students than what one of us could do alone? And that's the key. And Marilyn Friend talks about that too, saying in a co-taught classroom, this is a $100,000 classroom. What's different than a classroom that's being taught by one teacher? So there should be some type of difference. And co-planning is a key part of that process. And co-planning falls underneath that high leverage practice 1 from the high leverage practices for special education, that professionals collaborate to increase student success. So in case you haven't seen what that high leverage practice says, I know this is pretty wordy, took the liberty of highlighting some key words in this high leverage practice 1. And if you notice, high leverage, it's the first high leverage practice, collaboration for special education. So that should tell us how important that one is. So when we're collaborating, we're planning, we're developing it and adjusting instructional behavior plans. We're looking at data, we're looking at measurable outcomes, and the goal is we're maximizing student learning. So let's address first what these teacher responsibilities are, because one of the questions was, if the general ed teacher is doing all of the planning, what's the responsibility of the second person in the room? Sometimes it's a special education teacher, sometimes it's a specialist like Renita, who's a math specialist. So one thing that's important to remember in co-taught classes is the concept of parity, because co-teaching rests on the premise of shared expertise, not just simply having two adults in the classroom. So without that co-planning part of it, the parity between co-teachers might be elusive in the classroom, and it results in one teacher doing the bulk of the planning and teaching. And if you have two adults in the classroom working together in a co-taught environment, we want to make sure that both adults feel like they have shared responsibilities in that classroom for all students in the classroom, for all of the planning and the instruction in the class. So the Florida Inclusion Network has what I thought was a pretty cool graphic about what the responsibilities are in the classroom. So they broke it into what the general education teachers' responsibilities are, special education teachers' responsibilities, and then what they both have in common. So if we look at this list, we can see that the general ed teacher is responsible for the pacing and choosing the objectives and management overall in the classroom of the large group, and a knowledge of about how typical students might perform in the classroom. While the special education teacher focuses on the mastery of IEP goals and the pacing of instruction for those students, they focus on SDI, understanding the individual needs of students based on their IEP goals, and then the knowledge of the compliance with federal laws. But let's look at this middle column, what both are responsible for. If you look at that middle column, you can see that it's a lot more shared responsibilities than there are individual responsibilities for both teachers. So both are responsible for collaboration, instruction. They're equal partners. They both share developing the rules and routines for the classroom and decision making and shared implementation of those accommodations for students with IEPs. They're both responsible for sharing resources, and they're both responsible for advocating for their students. So that's where that parity comes in. So while the general ed teacher might have some more specialized expertise in the content, the special education teacher might have more specialized expertise in working with students with disabilities. Both are responsible for all the running of the classroom planning resources. It's not yet that's where you're just going to sprinkle some accommodations on what the general education teacher has in the plan. We're both responsible for both of those things. So when we talk about co-planning, there's one dilemma that we have, right? We want planning time. We don't have time for planning time, right? So what I'm going to share with you are some ways that you can co-plan together virtually and face to face. When I say face to face, I mean more synchronous, even though if you're just doing it via Zoom or whatever. So there are 3 levels of co-planning that we're going to talk about. There's macro planning, meso planning, and then micro planning. So macro planning is something that you do every 4 weeks or at the beginning of a unit. And this should be done synchronously because this is when you're doing an overview of a unit. So you need to have that face-to-face time talking to each other about what we're getting ready to do. And so when I say synchronously, it doesn't mean you have to be physically in a classroom right now. You all can meet virtually, but you need to have that time to talk to each other. So this is once every 4 weeks or at the beginning of a new unit. Then there is the middle level, meso planning, which is your weekly lesson plans overall. And that can be done synchronously if you have that kind of time, but it can also be done asynchronously. So I'm going to show you some ways that you can asynchronously plan weekly overview. And then finally is the micro planning, and that is your daily lesson plan. And that can be done both synchronously and asynchronously too. So we're going to start with macro planning, which is done every 4 weeks or at the beginning of a new unit. And when you think about this macro planning session, once a month or at the beginning of a new unit, think about 60 minutes. You need about an hour for this. So when we're talking to our general ed teachers about this, start saying, can we carve out 1 hour once a month to meet face to face, whether it's virtual or not? And when you say that, that makes it less daunting than saying we need to meet face to face every week. Then we say, oh, that's just, I don't know if I can do that. But it's just think 60 minutes once per month. So in order for this to work in 60 minutes, you need to have a structure for your planning time. And I'm going to share a planning protocol with you for that. There's some key information that you're going to need to prepare before the meeting, because remember, you just have 60 minutes. So there's some work that's going to have to pre-work that's going to have to be done. You want, being that you only have 60 minutes, you want to refrain from venting and chatting during this time. You know, if y'all want to vent about some things going on, you might have to do that, you know, on the phone in the evening, but not during this 60-minute time. And you want to have a clearly articulated agenda so you can meet these points. And you want to create a to-do list for after the meeting, because you're just meeting this once a month. You're going to have a to-do list to do. So things we're both going to agree to do to be prepared for the next few weeks of instruction. So during this macro planning, co-planning process, there's some things you have to do before the meeting. There's some things you have to do during the meeting, and there's some things that you have to do after. So what we're going to do is watch an abbreviated video of a macro planning session. And as we watch this video, I want you to think about, what did they have to do before this meeting? What did they do during this meeting? And what did they have to do after? So we know this is really a 60-minute session, but I've made this session 4 minutes and 16 seconds. So this is really abbreviated. So this video we're going to watch is a co-teaching team from Greenbrier Middle School. So as we watch them, we're going to watch them go through this process. So here we go. So think about what they had to do to be prepared before, then what did they do during, and then what did they do after.
Okay, Amy, we have two major SOLs that we have to look at. We've got solving 2 to 4 step equations in one variable, and they have to do it using the concrete materials, you know, like counters or cups, some kind of pictorial representation, and then paper and pencil like we do. The other one that we have to weave in this is that they have to be able to identify the properties that they're using as they solve the equation. So really from the jump start, we'll kind of get that in.
Okay.
Okay, we've got about 19 days according to our pacing guide. Did you have a chance to look at the pre-assessments?
I did, and basically, we have about probably 2 students in our group that know it and can probably do it on their own. The rest of them are pretty lost.
So I think we're going to have to spend 2 days on reviewing 2-step.
Okay.
So let's put down that day 2 and 3, we'll review 2-step.
Okay. So maybe we can break into small groups
Right.
for that and parallel teach?
I think so.
Okay.
And maybe what we can do is the kids that are really struggling, we'll give them basic 2-step equations. But if we've got some kids that are like, you know, Whit and Brandon that might be ready to move on, we can give them some more complex equations, because one of the things that we notice is fractions, decimals are huge on, you know, on the assessments, and the kids are struggling with that. So we'll do our 3 groups. I'm just going to call them A, B, and C right now. And C will give fractions and decimals
Okay.
as they're ready, and then Group A can just do basics.
Yes.
Because I
Very
think,
simple.
yeah, if we can get them to understand the concepts, then they'll be okay when we move them on.
Okay.
The meat of it is they've got to be able to solve the equations using collecting like terms, distributed property, variables on both sides. So that gives us about 16 days left. The problem is Thanksgiving comes in here, so I don't think we're not gonna be able to test before then.
No.
That's for sure. So maybe if we could get the basics covered before Thanksgiving, then when we come back, we can work on word problems and applications. And
yeah.
any ideas for the day 1 when we do the concrete thing? There's a website I like that has like a little balance beam, and you put, you know, something on this side and this side, and it stays balanced. And if you do something,
Yeah.
the only problem I have is with that is that they need to be engaged. We can do the
Can we
cups and
give
the
them,
counters.
yeah, the cups, and they can do it? Can we simulate them doing it at the desk, what is on the overhead?
Yeah.
Like, is there something they could have at their seat
Yeah.
that?
With the hands-on algebra has that little mat thing that we could use, and they could do it that way. And then they could write on it, you know, with like if this is X and this is, you know, or X plus 3 and this is 5, then they can practice doing that.
That's good.
Let's try that day to have them after we have them actually manipulate it around, have them maybe draw a picture of it, you know, where they where they might take like I don't know, the cup, And then when we meet next week to start planning for the week, we'll need to, excuse me, pin down the activity, and I'll pull out the manipulatives that we have. We have it's a little balance scale, and it's got these little mats. It's cute. I've used it before, but all right. So I'll pull that out. Will you get our groups going?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You divide them
Get
into
the
3
groups.
groups. Okay. And also the IXL assignments, if you'll do that.
Yeah.
And I'll get this ready. Anything else we're gonna need for next week's planning? Okay. All right, so you're gonna get the groups, I'm gonna get the exit ticket and the lesson for the concrete materials. And we'll meet back next week.
Okay, so let's talk. So what, in order to be prepared for that meeting, for it to run efficiently, what are some things that they had to do before?
They looked at data from their, I guess it was a pre-assessment or some kind of assessment. So they
Yes.
found out where the strengths and the weaknesses were, and they built their roadmap for how to strengthen any weak areas in the classroom.
Yes, yes. So they did. They did a pre-assessment first. So that's one thing that you might want to make sure you're implementing with your co-teacher. So you have some data to bring to this unit plan. What else did they do?
They knew how many days they had to unit. So she said, we have 19 days to get this done. So
Right. Right. So, so the general education teacher had already mapped out what happened, what the SOL was, how many days they had to teach it. Okay. So then during the meeting, they talked about that pre-assessment data. They talked about possible activities. So that's something they kind of did before too. They already had in mind, what are some activities we can do with this unit? And then they kind of map those out how they're going to do that. How about what about after the meeting? What are their responsibilities after the meeting? What did they kind of hash out?
Who was going to be responsible for groups
Mhm.
and who was going to be responsible for getting the concrete materials and doing the exit ticket?
Could you see that parity between the two of them? They had that parity, so the special education teacher had analyzed the data, but then she also contributed to how we can do it. And then they both left. Somebody was going to be forming the groups based on that data. Someone was going to be getting certain manipulatives together. Someone was going to be actually, continuing mapping out, and they were going to meet next week. So they had in their schedule to meet every week. But even if you didn't, if you have that roadmap to what our next 4 weeks, 19 days is going to look like. And something else they also had figured out too was, what days are we going to be out of school? You hear her talk about Thanksgiving. Okay, Thanksgiving is in the middle of this. So we need to make sure we keep that in mind too. So those things happen before, during, and they had already been prepared for before. They did some things during, that's the video we saw, and then they actually had some things for after. So in case you're wondering what can this agenda look like for a macro planning session, there are a couple of options that I'm going to show you, but they both have the same similar outline. So and we have some things to do pre-meeting and post-meeting. So before the meeting, the general ed teacher is going to map out what we're teaching for the next few weeks. Both teachers are going to consider resources that we can use, and then they're going to bring those to the meeting. So you're going to spend the first part of the meeting talking about okay, this is the standard that we're going to teach. This is what we need to cover while we're teaching that standard, using the framework. Then about 10 minutes reviewing data. And then you're going to spend about 15 minutes talking about what are some difficulties students may have and how are we going to address those possible difficulties. That's when they were talking about using concrete items, things like that. And then you're going to spend another 15 minutes discussing what co-teaching models might we use during this, while we're during our session, during our lessons. And then the final 8 minutes is more like housekeeping. Are there any concerns that we have, or is there anything that, or saying, okay, this is what making your to-do list, who's going to do what? That's that last 8 minutes of the session. And then post-meeting, everyone has their responsibilities, and you're going to take care of those. So I'm going to share 2 macro planning templates with you, and both of these can be used as Google Docs. So then you all can have keep record of that. So there's 2 different ones I'm going to show you. The first one is the Maryland Friend Planning Agenda. So it has those same components that we were just talking about. And so either you or your co-teacher would take notes on as you're going through. So you all have this running record of what we discussed, just in case when you're doing your weekly planning, you need to go back to it. So it talks about the curriculum topic, it talks about the data, instructional strategies, SDI, co-teaching arrangements and assignments, and then that reflection piece where you're preparing for the next meeting. The second one is very similar to that. It comes from the Florida Inclusion Network. So it has the same topics, it's just a different format, but it's the exact same topics. And then it puts these percentages on it. But it has the same topics, and then you just fill in each section. So those are the two different ones that you can use, and you're going to have access to those via our Google site. So, like I said, this first meeting needs to be a face-to-face meeting, whether it's a virtual face-to-face or you are in a school division that's actually meeting right now, which I think pretty much everybody is not. So you have different options, whether you're Zoom, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, FaceTime, whatever you want to do. So what do you think this macro planning can look like for you and your co-teaching partner?
Well, I know that my co-teacher and I, we don't spend anywhere close to like an hour, 45, even 30 minutes really planning. We're lucky to get in 15. And I think it's just because at my particular location, everyone is meetinged out. Every week we have 2-hour-long meetings for math and reading. Then we have another 45 minutes of coaching for math and reading every week. So I think by the time we get done with all those meetings, it's touch and go. We plan through texting, we shoot emails, or we take time right after class ends where we're kind of hanging out on the Zoom to go over quickly what we're going to do. But it's nothing that concrete as far as following a planning map.
And that's what I like about this macro planning, because if you can convince your co-teacher, this is once a month for an hour. Can we commit to once a month for an hour? And plan it in advance. Okay, we're going to meet on so-and-so, like plan it well in advance. What do you think?
I'm thinking about today, it could have, I think if the general ed and the SPED teacher had planned, it was an issue about when we're going to review benchmark questions. And this general ed teacher was using it as a poll, as her warm-ups. The SPED teacher didn't understand that. Well, she hasn't done it in 2 days, and but I'm saying, well, when you pull your groups, you can go over that with your children if you feel she isn't moved. But I think if they plan, and maybe because when I was in the classroom, I had a SPED teacher, and we planned together. We graded papers together. So and she would tell me, questions 10 and question 15 is what they missed the most on. We might want to go back. So I'm at a loss when I'm sitting here going, well, why aren't y'all planning together? Like, you have 45 minutes class times now. You have breaks in between, and you have an hour and a half virtual hour time that you could use to plan together. So, but I think if they use this planning sheet, it will work. So I'm gonna take that sheet and I'm gonna take it to my principal and see, can we get something done? Because I think if you plan together, you'll learn the content on both ends. When one person is out, that SPED teacher can step in, or maybe you have to go to a meeting or something. That's my SPED teacher could step in and roll.
And I think it will be good. Like you can just have a Google folder for each unit. So first the unit plan, and then the next one we're going to show you like how our weekly overview, which can be done asynchronously, and then our daily lesson plan. So everything's in one place. And so if a special education teacher has a question, I could just go to the SOL 5.7 folder. Oh, this is what we said we were going to do. Okay, this is what I'm supposed to be working on. So let's talk about that weekly planning, which is that middle level, the meso planning. So it's designed to provide an overview of the week. So this is not a detailed lesson plan. This is just an overview of the week. And it takes that unit plan and breaks it down into smaller chunks. And both the general education teacher and the special education teacher contributes to this plan. So this is not the general ed teacher just doing all the work on this. And this can be done synchronously if you have time, or it can be done asynchronously. So one person can, because now that we've had that face-to-face meeting for an hour, we know where we're going. Now we're just filling in the blanks. So I'm going to share 3 different weekly planning templates with you. And they can either be done on Google Docs or Google Sheets, or they can just be done in Microsoft as well. So this first planning template just breaks down each day. And this one has 2 pages. It has the first page that the general education teacher is going to fill out with the objective for each day of the week, what the lesson activities are. And then there's a second page that the special education teacher is going to fill out. So the special education teacher can fill in what are the co-teaching structures you're going to use, what adaptations are needed or SDI is needed, what materials or extra support are needed, and then some student data and notes. So the general ed teacher will fill out 1 page just with that week, what we're going to be doing this week. The special education teacher will fill out the second page. So then you can both see what each other is doing. The second one is similar to that. It still has the Monday through Friday. And then and it has the co-teaching approaches up there too, and the activities. So the general ed teacher can go in and put in the activities for each day. The special education teacher can go in and put in what is the special SDI going to look like for each of those activities. And then both teachers can talk about how we're going to evaluate this. Is it an exit ticket? Are we giving a quiz? Are we doing a Kahoot? What are we going to do? That's the evaluation part of it. And this third one is in the form of Excel or Google Sheets. So it's the same premise. So it has each day of the week. You put what the standards are. The general ed teacher will fill in what the lesson activities are. You would talk about how are we going to assess, what co-teaching approaches are we going to do, then what SDI we're going to do, and then what materials are needed and what data are we going to use or collect. So the same thing. So all of these, if you put them in Google Sheets or Google Forms, then both people can fill it in. And so we wouldn't have to be at the meeting at the same time, but we would have to see. So the only thing with these though, is you're going to have to set some deadlines. The general education teacher can't be filling it in Sunday night for Monday's lesson. So we have to have some boundaries. Let's agree that we're going to have it in by blank so I can fill in my part. So it's about that partnership, and we're going to be working together. So thinking about those 3 types of forms, we're going to annotate. Use your annotation tool. Which one of these do you think you could use with your co-teaching partner? You have the 2-page one where the general ed fills out one, special ed fills out another, but we're both looking at them. You have that Google Sheet, let's make an Excel form, and then you have that one that just has the SDI on it and the lesson. So if you can go to your annotate tool, so you just go to view options, annotate, and stamp, and just put some check marks by the ones you think you might be able to implement. And all of them really have the same information that you're collecting. It's like it just comes down to what type of format do you want to use. So all 3 of the formats can be used by anyone. All right, so here we go. Now we're talking about your daily lesson plans. This is the micro planning part of it. So it takes that weekly plan that's there and breaks it down into daily chunks. And like all of the other planning processes, then both the general education teacher and the special education teacher contribute to the plan and the teaching. And once you've had this plan, you've planned together, then we can teach together. And just like the meso planning, the weekly planning, it can be done synchronously or asynchronously. So depending on what your time is. So let's look at a couple of planning templates for our daily plan. This first one is the co-teaching lesson plan template that is used by the Excellence in Co-Teaching project from the VDOE. So as you notice, speaking of that parity, it has teacher 1 and teacher 2 listed on the lesson plan. It has those co-teaching approaches at the top, then just the standard things in the lesson plan, standard lesson outcomes, materials, vocabulary. But if you look at those lesson components, each teacher has a role in each part of the lesson plan. So if the special education teacher is doing an anticipatory set, what is the general education teacher doing in that time? We're not, we're face to face. Somebody's not out making copies while the other person is teaching. You know, each person has a role in each component of the lesson plan, all the way down to the closure and the homework section. And then at the bottom, it has accommodations, modifications, and then a section for notes. So that's the first template for daily planning. The second template is from the Florida Inclusion Network. So it's very similar. It has all the things, but if you notice, this also has a paraprofessional on here. So what is the paraprofessional doing is this part of the lesson too. And what I like about this one as well is that it has, what are the prerequisite skills that are needed for this lesson, and how we're going to assess those prerequisite skills. Then it has a section for accommodations, modifications, AT. It also has a place to check what model you're using and who's leading this part of the lesson. Is it the special education teacher, the general education teacher? We're both leading this part of the lesson. And then it has the core instruction part, which is the main part of the lesson. And then what is the SDI? And it's a 2-part page lesson plan, because then it has, the second page has the I do, we do, you do part of it. So, and so it's just like the first page, you will fill in who's leading the lesson, what it looks like. What we also have for you as resources are some completed examples. So if you want to look at what do these co-taught lesson plans look like if they're completed, in the folder with the co-teaching, with the co-planning templates are examples for every content area: math, reading, science, social studies, what it can look like if you have a completed co-taught lesson plan. All right, so those are the resources that are going to be available to you that Shelly's going to share. So we were going to do this human lineup, but being there's only 3 of you all, we can share out. So thinking about what we talked about today, what is your readiness to co-plan now? Do you feel not ready? You feel like you're getting there, or do you feel ready? So let's just hear from each person.
I'm ready to co-plan. I've been ready to co-plan since the beginning.
So just start with the unit first. Can we plan once? Can we plan once a month?
I don't know. It's going to have to be baby steps, at this point.
Definitely, I agree. That's a place to start. You just get in where you can. Put your foot in the door.
Mm-hmm.
And you start like tapping it a little bit until the door's wide open.
Right here. Well, I'm always ready to plan. I like planning. I love that's my thing. People think I hate grading papers, but I love curriculum and diving in what different way can I teach this. And so I work when I pull for, and I've noticed when I pull for planning, the regular ed teachers there, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I need to invite the SPED teacher in, and we all 3 of us can plan together, and mostly because so she'll know what's going on, because I don't even know if the plans are in a shared drive, but I don't know if they even look at the regular ed plans.
Well, probably, it's a difference between, like grade level planning and co-planning, because like the grade level plan is just like this overview. They still need that additional time to say, now, what are we going to do together? We're going to take what we did as a grade level and do it. What we're going to do is out for our class.
Right, because they're 3 through 6 is departmentalized. So I have one person teaching the math in those grades. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, maybe I need to invite the SPED teacher.
Oh, you do? Please do.
Yeah, and see will she come in, because I'm hearing a lot about the SDI, and I know a little bit about it, but I'm interested in seeing how the instruction would look from the SPED point of view and bridge them together. So, I mean, it looks like a win-win if everybody working together.
I agree.
Well, it's kind of hard for me to answer that question because I work with 9 different schools.
Yeah.
But from what I gather from the few schools that I have lots of interaction with, it's between the not ready and getting there.
Okay.
And it's basically more so on the part of the general educator. Trying to get them to understand that they need to partner up with the SPED teacher.
The load can be shared, if you're willing to let it be.
Exactly. They should be working collaboratively.
Yes, they definitely should be. Okay. Those resources are going to be shared with you. So you'll have all of those templates, access to all of those templates to share with your co-teacher, or if you're not in that position, with people who are co-teachers.
Mhm.
All right, thank you guys.